I'm Callen Moore, 32 years old, and what happened at my brother Trevor's birthday party last month still plays on a loop in my mind. I walked in carrying a gift I could barely afford, into a room filled with relatives who had already decided I was the problem. The penthouse I bought with years of grit and sacrifice. It became the battlefield for a demand I never agreed to, and a slap I'll never forget. Looking back, the signs were there, the stares, the forced smiles, the way Trevor smirked like he knew something I didn't. I've lived my whole life in a family that never celebrated my wins, but punished me for setting boundaries. Before we go deeper into this story, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if family drama, power shifts, and hard-earned peace are your kind of stories, hit like and subscribe. This one, you'll want to hear to the end. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, in a beige two-story house with a backyard just big enough for a rusted swing set and a tired dog. On the surface, we were your average middle-class family, but the real architecture of our home wasn't built from wood or drywall. It was built around my older brother, Trevor. Trevor was the golden boy, the firstborn, the son my parents always dreamed of. He was the loud one, the messy one, the one who left a trail of half-finished ideas and broken rules behind him. But somehow, none of that ever seemed to matter. When he shattered a neighbor's window playing baseball in the living room after being told not to, Dad laughed. "Boys will be boys," he said, as if recklessness were some rite of passage. When Trevor brought home a string of D's on his report card, Mom smiled sympathetically and said, "He's just too creative for a system like this." Then there was me. I was 3 years younger, quieter, sharper in the way kids are when they learn early to observe instead of interrupt. I discovered computers in fourth grade, the blinking cursor, the endless possibilities of a blank screen, and it was like my brain finally had something to stretch itself around. I stayed late after school in the computer lab, teaching myself how to code basic animations and exploring how systems worked from the inside out. I fell in love with logic and problem solving. It made me feel powerful, like I mattered. But at home, those feelings didn't last. When I came home with straight A's, Mom barely looked up from folding laundry. "That's nice, sweetie," she said, before launching into a story about Trevor's latest drama. His coach didn't understand him, or he got into it with a teacher again. When my robotics team won a regional competition and brought home a trophy half my size, my parents didn't show up. Trevor had a football game that day. He sat on the bench the whole time, but they were in the stands, cheering anyway. College applications came, and I applied to 12 schools. I was accepted into 8, with scholarships to match. I chose North Valley University for its computer science program. When I asked if my parents could help with tuition, Mom shook her head. "We're trying to save for Trevor's future. College is expensive." So I worked. Morning shifts at a coffee shop, retail on the weekends, and late-night data entry gigs. Every dollar I earned was stretched across textbooks, rent, and leftover cafeteria meals. Trevor, meanwhile, was enrolled at a private college my parents paid for in full. He dropped out after one semester because the professors didn't get him. They nodded, understanding. Then they funded his second attempt. And later, a third. The high point of that chapter wasn't any graduation or award. It was the moment I understood, truly understood, that in my family, I could do everything right and still be invisible. My success wasn't praised. It wasn't even acknowledged. Not unless Trevor didn't need anything that day. That realization didn't come like thunder. It came quietly, like a light flickering out. I stopped hoping they'd be proud. I stopped trying to impress. And I started building something for myself. Not because anyone believed in me, but because I was tired of waiting for them to. I graduated from North Valley University with honors, a double major in computer science and business, a minor in mathematics, and a resume that looked like it belonged to someone twice my age. There was no celebration, no dinner out. My parents came to the ceremony, sat in the back, and left early because Trevor had called. Something about a landlord issue. He really needs us, my mom whispered as they rushed out. I stood alone outside the auditorium with my diploma in hand, watching families embrace and pose for pictures, listening to laughter that didn't feel like it belonged to my world. I didn't cry. I was used to this by now. My first job out of college was at a small tech firm in Milwaukee, entry level, barely enough to cover my student loans and the rent on a tiny studio apartment where the heat worked only if you jiggled the thermostat just right. I didn't mind. It was mine. I worked 60-hour weeks, taught myself additional coding languages at night, and contributed to open source projects on the weekends to build my portfolio. I didn't go out much. I didn't spend money I didn't have. My reward came in small doses, the satisfaction of debugging a problem at 2 a.m., a coworker's nod of respect, a quiet paycheck deposited every other Friday. Trevor, meanwhile, stayed exactly where I left him, back home in Madison, still unemployed, still figuring things out. He rotated through jobs like seasons, a retail gig that ended because his manager had it out for him, a restaurant where the schedule was too rigid for his creative energy, and a temp office job that lasted less than 3 weeks because the corporate world was too suffocating. Every failure was reframed as the world not understanding him. My parents repeated those words like a script: Trevor just hasn't found his calling yet. Or, he's too smart for those menial jobs. I heard it all through the phone, while they cooked his meals, folded his laundry, and tiptoed around his moods at age 28. I kept visiting on holidays, still trying to be the good daughter, still hoping, somewhere deep down, that maybe this time they'd see me. But each visit chipped away at that hope. I'd bring news of a successful project launch or a promotion, and my mother would nod politely before launching into a dramatic update about Trevor's latest venture. It was like shouting into a canyon and only hearing silence in return, so I stopped shouting. I started building something quieter but far more valuable: distance. Not physical at first, emotional. I stopped volunteering information. I stopped expecting enthusiasm or pride. Instead, I invested in friendships where validation wasn't a currency to be begged for. I joined a hiking group on weekends, a book club on Tuesdays. I started meeting people who didn't see my ambition as a threat or my confidence as arrogance. And then I met Alyssa. We crossed paths at a Women in Tech conference in Minneapolis. She was a senior developer at a startup and had the kind of calm confidence I envied. We grabbed coffee after a panel and ended up talking for hours. She grew up in a household that celebrated success. She couldn't believe some of the stories I told her. "Callen, that's not normal," she said gently, after I recounted how my parents skipped my graduation for Trevor's rent crisis. "Parents are supposed to be proud when you achieve something." I didn't know how to respond to that. It was the first time someone had said it so plainly. Alyssa became a steady presence in my life. She listened without judgment, called out the patterns I'd normalized, and reminded me that I didn't have to keep earning love that should have been freely given. She didn't try to fix anything. She just stayed. And that was more healing than any apology I was still waiting for. As the years passed, the distance between me and my family grew, not from anger, but from clarity. I still called on birthdays, still sent cards on holidays, but I stopped sharing pieces of myself that they never valued. I stopped expecting them to ask questions about my work or what I was proud of. I stopped hoping they'd change. And somewhere in that quiet, I started to change instead. I was no longer the girl trying to prove her worth at every family dinner. I was a woman who had learned that sometimes the only way to be seen is to stop standing in the shadow. By the time I turned 30, I had quietly built the kind of career that no one in my family had ever asked about. Yet strangers would have applauded, At Altura Systems, I wasn't just another developer lost in a sea of engineers. I was leading projects, mentoring junior teammates, and solving complex architectural challenges that made senior leadership take notice. When my manager pulled me into his office one Tuesday afternoon, I thought I was about to be given another late-stage bug to fix. Instead, he handed me a sealed envelope and said, "You've earned this." Inside was a promotion to senior software architect, and a compensation package that included stock options and a salary I had once only dreamed about. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded, said thank you, and walked back to my desk with shaking hands and a silent smile. Then, after work, I sat alone in my apartment and let the truth wash over me. I had done this. With no help, no shortcuts, no safety net, just grit, curiosity, and the kind of work ethic you build when you've spent your whole life trying to prove you matter. That night, I opened a new browser tab and typed in Denver penthouses for sale. It wasn't impulsive. I had been saving for years, budgeting, investing, and watching the market. I knew I wanted something that felt permanent, not flashy, not loud, just mine. 2 months later, I closed on a two-bedroom penthouse at the Summit Tower in downtown Denver. 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the Rockies that made the city feel like it was holding its breath. The open-concept living space flowed seamlessly into a chef's kitchen with quartz countertops and sleek appliances. The master bedroom had a soaking tub positioned to catch the reflection of city lights. The second bedroom became my home office, where I installed bookshelves and positioned my desk to face the sunrise. But this wasn't just real estate. This was evidence. Proof that I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. That everything they ignored, downplayed, dismissed, had become the foundation of a life they could no longer take credit for. I didn't buy the penthouse to impress anyone. I bought it because, for the first time in my life, I wanted something beautiful to wrap around the parts of me no one else had ever honored. I had spent decades minimizing myself to fit into rooms where I was barely welcome. Now, I had built a room of my own, and it touched the sky. The building came with amenities I once associated with other people's lives: a rooftop garden with string lights and grilling stations, a fitness center that looked like a spa, and a concierge who knew my name before I introduced myself. Every detail felt intentional. Every keycard swipe reminded me that I no longer needed permission to feel safe, successful, or at peace. Alyssa was the first person I invited over after I moved in. She brought champagne, tossed her shoes off at the door, and stepped out onto the balcony like it was the deck of a yacht. "Callen," she said, staring out at the city below, "you earned every square inch of this place." We clinked glasses, and for a moment, I let myself believe it. And then came the ache. That quiet, familiar ache of wishing, just once, that my family would be proud of me the way they were of Trevor for simply breathing. Still, I reached out. I invited them to a small housewarming dinner. I cooked my mother's favorite lemon-roasted chicken, stocked my father's preferred scotch, and even made sure to chill Trevor's go-to beer in the fridge. I told myself this wasn't about approval, that it was just good manners. But the truth is, some part of me still wanted them to see me, really see me, standing in everything I had built with nothing but my own two hands. I wanted them to step onto that balcony, look out at the lights, and realize what I'd known all along, that I had never needed to be anyone's favorite child to build a life worth living. All I needed was the chance and the will to claim it. I told myself it was just dinner. One evening, a simple housewarming. No expectations, no emotional landmines. Just a gesture. A way to say, "This is where I am now, and you're still invited to be part of it." I spent all day preparing. My mother's favorite lemon-roasted chicken, my father's go-to scotch, poured into crystal tumblers I bought just for the occasion. I even stocked Trevor's preferred IPA, knowing exactly which brand he always mentioned in passing. I lit candles, laid out the new dinnerware I had saved for months to buy, pressed cloth napkins into perfect folds. Every detail was a quiet hope. They arrived 45 minutes late. No call, no apology, just the ding of the elevator and the slow shuffle of feet across my hallway. My mother walked in first, her eyes scanning the space like she was inspecting a hotel room she didn't book. "This building must have a massive HOA fee," she said instead of hello. "Seems wasteful for one person." My father followed, heading straight for the window. "Pretty flashy place," he said. "Hope you're not overextending. The market could turn any day now." Trevor wandered behind them, uninvited hands opening cabinets and closets like he was on a self-guided tour. "Must be nice," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Some people just get all the breaks." I smiled tightly and invited them to sit. The table was set, candles flickering, the scent of lemon and rosemary filling the room. I tried to steer the conversation toward neutral ground: work, the city, the weather. But my mother spent most of the meal detailing Trevor's latest job interview. "They'd be lucky to have someone with his range of experience," she said proudly. "He's done a little bit of everything." When I mentioned my recent promotion, my father didn't look up from his plate. "Companies throw around fancy titles these days," he said. "In my time, you had to work decades for something like senior." I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. After dinner, I invited them onto the balcony. The sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting a soft golden glow over the skyline. It was one of those rare Denver evenings that made the whole city feel cinematic. Trevor leaned on the railing, beer in hand. "So, what's a place like this run you?" he asked. "You must be making serious bank." I was about to redirect the conversation when my mother chimed in, her tone sweet but sharp. "Yes, Callen. It does make us wonder if you're being wise with your money. You know, family should come before material things." The implication was clear, but no one said it outright. Not yet. They left soon after. My mother barely touched the dessert I spent hours baking. My father said something vague about early mornings. Trevor grabbed 2 extra beers from the fridge on his way out and didn't say thank you. When the door closed, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the echo of a space that had wanted to be filled, and wasn't. The next morning, Alyssa called. "So," she said gently, "how did it go?" I told her everything. The late arrival, the jabs disguised as concern, the way Trevor rifled through my cabinets like he was casing the place for himself. I told her about the moment on the balcony when my mother hinted that having a home of my own was somehow a betrayal. "Classic," she said with a sigh. "They can't celebrate you, Callen, because if they do, it forces them to acknowledge what Trevor isn't." That sentence sat with me all day. They couldn't celebrate me, because my success didn't just shine, it cast shadows, and those shadows made it impossible for them to pretend Trevor was still the center of the world. I had invited them into my sanctuary, not for praise, not for validation, just to share something real, something I built. But they didn't see me. They saw a threat. And for the first time, I started to wonder if the space I had carved out in this world, this beautiful, hard-earned space, was only mine because I stopped waiting for them to step into it. After the housewarming, I told myself it was just a one-off, a rough evening, a mismatch of expectations. I even called my mom a few days later to thank her for coming, pretending not to notice that she never once thanked me for hosting. But the tone had shifted. Subtly, at first, then with increasing boldness. At the next Sunday dinner, one of the few I still attended out of obligation, not affection, my mother casually mentioned that Trevor was between opportunities again. Her eyes flicked toward me as she said it, like a dealer sliding a card across a table. It's just hard, she sighed, seeing your little sister in that big, beautiful place while he's struggling to cover his car payment. It's not easy for him. I said nothing, just nodded politely and changed the subject. I knew better than to bite. The following month, at Thanksgiving, the full extended family gathered in my parents' dining room, roast turkey, cranberry sauce, and resentment simmering just beneath the surface. My Aunt Judith leaned in after her second glass of wine and said, "Wouldn't you be lonely in that penthouse all by yourself? Callen, I mean. Surely there's room for family. Trevor's so lucky to have a sister like you. I'm sure he'd appreciate a place to land while he gets on his feet." I laughed softly, like she was joking. She wasn't. At Christmas, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and guilt. While I was stirring cider, my Uncle Dan cornered me near the sink. "A man needs space to feel respected," he said, handing me a dish towel I didn't ask for. "Trevor just needs a break. Callen, you've got that spare room. It's the kind of thing families do for each other." I wiped the counter in small, furious circles and gave a non-committal, "We'll see," because that's what I had learned to say when I had no intention of saying yes, but wasn't ready to be labeled the difficult one. The pressure wasn't always direct. Sometimes it came in glances, in sighs, in long pauses after sentences that trailed off but carried weight. "I don't know how much longer he can live here," my dad said one night on the phone, "but of course, he doesn't have many options." Another silence. Another door, politely cracked open, was waiting for me to walk through it. I didn't. Instead, I dodged and deflected. I changed the subject to work. I talked about snowstorms and holiday travel. I kept my voice even, my tone pleasant, but I felt the walls inching closer each time. And Trevor, he never asked directly. That would have required accountability. Instead, he dropped hints like breadcrumbs. "Man, I bet that view's even better in the winter." He'd say at dinner, "I should come check it out sometime. Maybe crash there for a few nights." Once, he laughed as he passed behind me at a family gathering and said, "You've got that fancy shower. Right, I should test it out sometime." It wasn't flirtation, it wasn't humor. It was a kind of trespassing, testing the boundaries without ever acknowledging they existed. And still, I tried to be diplomatic, polite, reasonable. I told myself that saying no too soon would only escalate things. That I could outmaneuver the situation with grace, with subtlety. That if I didn't give them a hard line, maybe they'd back off. But the truth was harder to admit. I was still afraid. Afraid of being labeled selfish. Afraid of losing the threadbare connection I still had with them. Afraid that if I stood my ground too soon, I'd become the villain in a story they had already written about me. So I kept dancing around the unspoken request, kept pretending not to hear the cue. But with each conversation, with each family gathering, one thing became unmistakably clear. They weren't asking. They were preparing. 3 weeks before Trevor's 35th birthday, he lost his job. Again. This time it was at an insurance agency owned by a friend's father, practically handed to him. He lasted 2 months before being let go for inconsistent performance. But according to my parents, the real problem was that his manager felt threatened by Trevor's natural leadership. The day after he was fired, my mom called. "Callen, your brother's going through a rough patch," she said with that familiar note of expectation wrapped in concern. I knew what was coming. His car payments due, and with his birthday coming up. She trailed off, waiting for me to fill in the silence. Against my better judgment, I sent $300. 3 days later, Dad called. "Trevor's rent is overdue. These landlords are brutal these days. Just until he gets back on his feet." Another $1, $200. And then came the requests for groceries, utility bills, even a new suit for interviews. each one framed as temporary, as if my refusal would make me the problem. By the week of his birthday, I'd sent nearly $3,000 I would never see again. And then came the party. It was a full-scale family gathering, held at my parents' home in Madison. Balloons, banners, a buffet of Trevor's favorite food. I arrived right on time, carrying a wrapped box that held a designer watch I couldn't really afford, but bought anyway. Some part of me still clung to the belief that generosity might finally be enough. My mother greeted me with her usual mix of judgment and control. "Finally," she said, though I was exactly on time. "Put your gift on the table. Marcus is in the backyard." The house was buzzing with chatter. Relatives I hadn't seen in months offered polite smiles but avoided anything deeper. I heard my name in corners, always connected to that apartment or that job. My success had become a conversation piece no one could quite make sense of. Dinner was served at 6. I was seated at the far end of the table, distant from Trevor but close enough to hear my father loudly declare, "The problem with today's job market is they don't know how to spot real talent." Trevor nodded solemnly over his fourth beer. "They want robots, not visionaries." I stayed silent. After cake, an elaborate mousse from a bakery my mom once said was too expensive for non-essentials, Trevor began opening gifts. Mine came last. He unwrapped it slowly, barely glanced at the watch, and said, "Thanks, sis." Without looking up, my mother chimed in, "Isn't that thoughtful? Callen knows how much you love quality timepieces." He shrugged and set it aside. I was ready to leave when my father tapped his glass with a spoon. "If I could have everyone's attention," he said. "We have something important to discuss." My stomach tightened. My mother stood beside him. "As you all know, Trevor has had a difficult year. And in times like these, family must come together." I already knew what was coming. I just didn't know how far they'd take it. Uncle Dan leaned forward. "Callen, it's simple. Really. You've got that penthouse all to yourself. Trevor needs a place to stay while he gets back on his feet. That second bedroom you use as an office, it's perfect." The room went still. "You want Trevor to move into my home?" I asked, careful to keep my voice calm. "Just temporarily." My father said, "It makes sense. You're hardly ever home. He'd take good care of it." My mother added, "And you'd barely notice him." Trevor smiled, smug. He knew. He'd known all along. "I'm sorry," I said. "But that's not going to work for me. My home is my sanctuary. It's not something I can offer up, even to family." "So you're refusing to help your brother?" My mother snapped. "I've helped him, repeatedly. But this is a boundary I'm not willing to cross." "Boundaries?" My father scoffed. "This isn't therapy. This is family. There should be boundaries." I said, "Even in family. Especially in family." The air cracked. My mother stormed toward me. Before I could step back, her palm met my cheek with a sharp, audible slap. The room went silent. "Ungrateful girl," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you." No one moved. No one spoke. My father looked away. Trevor smirked. A few cousins turned their faces, pretending not to see. In that moment, clarity arrived like lightning. This wasn't a family. It was a system. A machine powered by silence, guilt, and control. I picked up my purse. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said, "No," and walked out the door. And this time, I didn't look back. The drive home from Trevor's birthday party felt unreal. My cheek still burned from the slap, but the deeper sting was the silence. The silence of a room full of people, family, who watched me be struck and did nothing. No one stepped in. No one said a word. In their eyes, I hadn't been assaulted. I had been corrected. Back at the summit tower, I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could even move. When I finally stepped into my penthouse, I locked the door behind me like it might keep the shame out. I didn't cry right away. That came later, in waves, the kind that crash in and pull the ground out from under you. I curled up on my living room floor with my arms around my knees and let the truth settle in. They had never been my safety, and they never would be. I called Alyssa. As soon as she answered, I broke down. Between sobs, I told her everything: the confrontation, the slap, the way no one looked surprised. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't tell me to forgive. She just listened. Callen, she said softly, what they did. It wasn't just cruel, it was abuse. You know that, right? I'd never used that word before. Abuse. But it echoed in my mind long after we hung up. And suddenly, so much made sense. I didn't sleep that night. And when my phone buzzed at 6 a.m., I knew exactly what I'd find. From my father. Your mother is devastated. You owe her an apology. From Aunt Judith. Family business should stay private. You made a scene. From Trevor. Thanks for ruining my birthday. Again. Classic Callen. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I finally understood. Responding would only reopen the door. And I was done keeping doors open for people who treated me like a threat instead of a daughter. I blocked all of them. The peace that followed lasted 2 hours. Then my building concierge called. Ms. Moore, there are 2 visitors in the lobby. They say they're your parents. They're being insistent. My chest tightened. Please don't let them up. Of course, the concierge replied calmly. Would you like me to call security? Yes. And make a note. No family members without prior notice. Under any circumstances. I watched through the peephole as Carl, the security guard, calmly escorted my parents back to the elevator. My father looked furious. My mother was dabbing at her eyes like a performance she'd rehearsed. The next day, I returned to work, desperate for normalcy. But around noon, Jenna from HR knocked gently on my office door. Your brother's downstairs, she said quietly. He's demanding to see you. Says it's a family emergency. I closed my laptop without a word, walked straight to security, and issued a formal no-contact order. Trevor was escorted out. Again. I stood by the glass wall of the lobby, watching him shout something incoherent at the front desk before disappearing onto the street. That night, I opened my phone and saw it. A post on his social media. Sad when your own sister forgets where she came from. All that money, and still no heart. Family first. Some people change beneath it, were comments from relatives and family friends. You deserve better. Trevor. So sorry you're dealing with this. Callen should be ashamed. That was the last straw. I blocked them all. Every single one. Then I called a security firm and upgraded my building protocols. Reinforced locks. A new door camera. A private alert system is connected to the front desk. And when that was done, I sat on the balcony of my penthouse, the Denver skyline twinkling beneath a moonless sky. And I made a decision I should have made years ago. I was done. Not just with the noise, not just with the guilt, but with the illusion that blood alone made someone safe. Because sometimes, the most dangerous place you can be is in the center of a family that never learned how to love without conditions. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope, stamped with the name of a law firm I'd never heard of. At first, I thought it was junk mail, maybe a real estate flyer or a misdirected HOA update. But inside was a neatly typed letter, formal and cold. My full name is in bold at the top. It read, Our client asserts that you made a verbal commitment to provide temporary housing at your residence, the Summit Tower, to your brother Trevor Moore. You are hereby notified that failure to honor this verbal agreement may result in legal action. I sat still for a full minute before the weight of it landed. They were threatening to sue me, my family, for not letting my brother live in my home. It would have been laughable if it hadn't felt so personal. I hadn't made any such promise. I hadn't even entertained the idea. The birthday party had made my boundaries crystal clear. But here it was, in black and white, a new strategy to bend me back into submission. When guilt failed, when shame fell short, they turned to intimidation. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't just dysfunction. This was war. I called Alyssa, read her the letter out loud. Her voice stayed calm, but I heard the tightness beneath it. You need to speak to someone. Callen. Not just a lawyer, a therapist. Someone who can help you untangle this. So I did. That afternoon, I reached out to Dr. Evelyn Holloway, a therapist I'd seen years ago when I was burning out from work stress. She'd been kind, insightful. But back then, I wasn't ready to look too closely at the roots. Now I was. She squeezed me the next day. Her office was exactly as I remembered. Soft lighting, the faint scent of citrus and books, and shelves lined with carefully chosen objects that whispered calm. I sat down, handed her the letter, and tried to steady my voice. I'm not sure if you remember me, I said. Doctor. Holloway smiled gently. I do. You're Callen. As she read, I watched her expression shift, compassion layered with a flicker of concern. When she looked up, her voice was steady, direct. This, she said, holding the letter between us, is emotional abuse. It's manipulation dressed in legalese. I nodded slowly. I keep wondering if I'm overreacting. They're my family. Shouldn't I at least try to understand where they're coming from? Dr. Holloway didn't hesitate. What you're experiencing, Callen, isn't love. It's control. And from everything you've told me, this didn't begin with a penthouse. This began long before, when your needs were dismissed, your accomplishments minimized, and your role in the family reduced to support staff for your brother's chaos. I hadn't cried when I got slapped. I hadn't cried when Trevor showed up at my job. But I cried then, because hearing someone name it, out loud, made the truth undeniable. We spent the session unpacking years of patterns I had normalized: the golden child and the scapegoat, the parentification of the responsible daughter, the gaslighting disguised as concern. Dr. Holloway didn't just listen. She named what I had never been allowed to name. You were taught, she said, that love means giving until there's nothing left, that loyalty is silence, and that your worth is measured by how well you carry everyone else's mess. And in that quiet, softly lit room, something broke, and something else began. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of saying no. I felt empowered, validated, seen. As I walked back to my car, letter in hand, I realized I wasn't afraid of what came next. I wasn't going to crumble under legal threats. I wasn't going to plead for understanding. I was done apologizing for the life I built, and I was finally ready to defend it. The day after I met with Dr. Holloway, I forwarded the legal threat to Claire Bennett, a friend from college who had since built a reputation as one of Denver's sharpest civil attorneys. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I sent her the full story, including screenshots, messages, the background with my family, and the envelope that had cracked wide open. She called me 20 minutes later. Callen, she said, this isn't just weak. It's laughable. They don't have a case. But what are they doing? It's harassment. And it ends now. Claire drafted a formal cease and desist order the same afternoon. It was clear, direct, and unapologetic. The letter outlined that I had made no verbal agreement, that any further attempts to harass, defame, or intimidate me, publicly or privately, would result in legal consequences. It also warned that showing up at my home or workplace again would trigger immediate pursuit of a restraining order. I read the letter 3 times before we sent it. It didn't just say no. It said, "I see you. I'm not afraid. And I am no longer playing your game." I had never felt more protected. That weekend, I hired a security consultant recommended by Claire. We installed new digital locks, security cameras at both entrances to my penthouse, and set up a flag with my building's concierge team. No one, especially family, would be allowed up without prior written approval. I even created a protocol with front desk staff for emergencies, just in case someone tried to manipulate their way through. For the first time, I didn't just feel like I was closing a door. I was finally locking it. That Sunday, as I was sipping coffee and catching up on work, my phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected name, Rachel Linwood. My cousin. We hadn't spoken in years. I heard what happened. She wrote, "I want you to know. You're not alone." Rachel had been the family's other black sheep, the one who'd chosen theater school over a business degree, the one whose parents cut her off financially when she said she didn't want to marry the man they picked for her. I remembered how my mother used to talk about her in whispered warnings. Don't end up like Rachel. We met later that week at a quiet coffee shop tucked behind a bookstore in Cherry Creek. She looked older, wiser, but her smile was the same, soft, knowing, unshaken. What happened at Trevor's party was awful, she said as soon as we sat down. I should have said something. I was there. I saw it. And I froze. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until I heard it. Thank you, I said. No one else has even acknowledged it. We talked for hours. About family patterns. About being labeled difficult the moment we drew a boundary. About how love in our family was always a transaction, not a given. She told me something I'll never forget. They don't know how to love people they can't control, she said. But that doesn't make you the problem. It makes them unsafe. Rachel had gone no contact for almost 4 years after her own breaking point. She said it was the loneliest and healthiest decision of her life. Now, she had limited, scheduled contact with only the relatives who respected her boundaries. And peace, she said, had never felt more real. I wish someone had told me sooner that estrangement can be healing, she added. You don't owe anyone access to you just because you share blood. When I got home that night, I added Rachel to my contact list under a new category chosen family. Because sometimes, strength doesn't come from standing alone. Sometimes, it comes from realizing someone else once stood in the same fire and made it out the other side still whole, still standing, still free. It had been 6 weeks since the slap, the threats, and the silence I chose in return. Long enough for the noise to settle, long enough for me to find my footing, but not so long that the damage had faded. It was time, not for revenge, not for reconciliation, for clarity. I arranged the meeting at a quiet restaurant near downtown Denver. I chose a private dining room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lock on the door. Claire, my attorney, had advised me to choose a public setting with staff nearby, just in case. I brought a folder with me. Inside were carefully organized documents, timelines, and receipts. My history, in print. A record they couldn't rewrite. My parents arrived on time. My mother wore a mask of wounded grace. My father looked worn down, unsure of which side he was supposed to stand on. Trevor, as expected, showed up 10 minutes late, not apologetic, smug, as if this were some performance he expected to dominate. Thank you for coming, I said once we were all seated and the server had left. I wanted to speak with you clearly, calmly, and without interruption, about where things stand and where they go from here. My mother cut in before I could continue. You could start with an apology, she said sharply, for storming out of your brother's birthday, for ignoring our calls, for dragging this family through embarrassment. I didn't flinch. I won't be apologizing for protecting myself. I said, measured. What happened at that party was not just inappropriate, it was abusive. You ambushed me with demands, and when I refused, you struck me. No one checked if I was okay. No one stood up. That silence said everything. Trevor rolled his eyes. It was just a slap. Get over it. If a stranger had done it, it would be assault, I replied. Being family doesn't make it any less serious. I opened the folder and slid 3 copies of the timeline across the table. This is my journey, I said. Every job I worked was to pay for my education. Every apartment I lived in was while saving for my home. Every promotion I earned. Every dollar I made without help. My father glanced at the document, eyes flicking with discomfort. My mother pushed hers away without reading it. On the next page, I continued. You'll see Trevor's record. The 3 colleges you paid for. The jobs he left. The loans that were never repaid. The help I've given. $3,000 in the last month alone. This is disgusting, Trevor muttered. You're trying to shame me. I'm presenting facts, I said, because for years, I've been told I had it easy, while he was the one who struggled. But struggle isn't the same as refusal, and responsibility isn't a punishment. I placed one final document on the table. These are my boundaries moving forward, I said. If any of you want a relationship with me, these are the terms. The list was simple. No more requests for money, directly or indirectly. No discussions about Trevor moving into my home. Respectful communication only. No yelling, manipulation, or physical aggression. No unannounced visits to my home or workplace. Acknowledgement of past behavior, and a commitment to honoring these boundaries. If these are respected, I continued, I'm open to rebuilding. Slowly. If they're violated, I will end all contact for no less than 6 months. My mother's jaw tightened. You're acting like we're your employees. No, I said. I'm acting like an adult setting limits with people who have consistently crossed them. Trevor scoffed. So it's your way or nothing. It's respect, or nothing, I said. And I'm okay with either. The silence that followed was deep, angry, and heavy with disbelief. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother's eyes filled with tears, more performance than pain. If you walk out now, she said, don't expect to be welcomed back. In the past, that threat would have shattered me, but this time, I breathed in, steady and clear. I'm not walking out. I said softly, I'm choosing myself. And I stood. I gathered my folder. I left enough cash on the table to cover my tea. And I walked out of that room not knowing if I would ever speak to them again. But knowing, without a doubt, that I had finally spoken for myself. In the weeks after the confrontation at the restaurant, the silence from my family was deafening. But this time, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space, breathing room, a stillness I hadn't known I needed until it wrapped itself around me like peace. No more surprise visits, no more guilt-laced voicemails, no more backhanded messages framed as concern. They didn't call, they didn't write, and they didn't sign the agreement I had placed in front of them. That, too, was an answer. So I honored my word. I went no contact. And instead of mourning that silence, I used it. I poured myself back into work, into code and architecture diagrams, into leading my team through one of our most complex launches to date. My calendar is filled with strategy meetings and mentoring sessions. My evenings no longer ended in exhaustion from emotional damage control, but in satisfaction from building things that mattered. I deepened my connection with people who saw me for who I was. Alyssa, steady and present, became more like family than blood had ever managed to be. Jenna from work started joining me for hikes on weekends, and our friendship blossomed beyond break room coffee chats. I joined a community writing group, not because I needed one more project, but because I wanted to create something for myself, without pressure or performance, and therapy. Therapy became my anchor. With Dr. Holloway, I continued to unravel the knots I'd spent years pretending weren't there. She helped me map the patterns I'd been raised to repeat: the overfunctioning, the people-pleasing, the chronic guilt. Slowly, I started to let go of the version of me who had built her life around proving she was worth loving. Now, I was building something else, something quieter, stronger, mine. About 2 months after the restaurant meeting, I heard from Rachel. She sent a text. "Thought you'd want to know. Trevor got a job, retail associate at a sporting goods store, and he's moved in with a roommate from high school." I stared at the message for a long time, not because I wanted to celebrate or gloat, but because it confirmed something I'd always suspected: when the enabling ends, the excuses stop holding. Trevor had run out of lifelines. Our parents, worn thin from years of denial, had finally begun to withhold their usual safety net. And I, the selfish sister, was no longer available for rescue missions. So he did what every adult eventually has to do. He figured it out. It was humbling and strangely relieving. Proof that my no had not ruined him. It had freed him, or at least forced him to confront the parts of himself no one else had ever challenged. We still didn't speak, and I felt no urgency to change that. But I no longer carried the weight of wondering if he'd ever stand on his own. He would, because now, he had no choice. As for my parents, they remained silent. No apology, no explanation, just absence. And while there was a time that silence would have carved me open, now it simply confirmed that I had made the right choice. You can't rebuild with people who deny the damage, but you can rebuild with truth, with chosen family, with boundaries that hold, and people who respect them. 6 months after that final meeting, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse one evening, a glass of wine in hand, the Denver skyline glittering below. Around me, laughter from a small dinner party. Alyssa, Rachel, Jenna, and two others who had come into my life not out of obligation, but out of choice. And as I looked around, I realized something simple and profound. This was family, not the one I was born into, the one I had built, intentionally, carefully, and without apology. From people who saw me, and from the self I had fought so hard to reclaim. 4 months after the final confrontation, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from my father. No subject line, no signature, just quiet words on a quiet morning. "Callen, I've been doing a lot of thinking since we met. I won't pretend to understand everything, but I can see now that I haven't always treated you fairly. Your mother's not ready to have that conversation. Trevor certainly isn't. But I wanted you to know I'm proud of what you've built, and I respect the strength it took to stand your ground. If you're willing, I'd like to talk, just the two of us." It wasn't a full reckoning, but it was something. I sat with it for a day before responding. My reply was short, measured, but open. I agreed to meet him for coffee the following week, in a public place, with expectations clear. No defense of the past, no rewriting history, just presence. Maybe that was enough for now. Trevor, as far as I knew, was still working retail, still living with a roommate, still blaming the world for not recognizing his brilliance. We hadn't spoken since the birthday, and while I felt no anger, I also felt no pull to bridge the distance. Some gaps are necessary, some silences are sacred. That spring, I hosted a small gathering at my penthouse. No decorations, no speeches, just the people who had shown up when it counted. Alyssa brought wine. Jenna brought her signature chocolate tart. Rachel brought a deck of cards and a playlist of 90s songs we all pretended not to know by heart. We talked, laughed, cooked in bare feet, and let the city lights flicker through the glass like stars close enough to touch. At one point, as we stood on the balcony, Alyssa raised her glass. To Callen, she said. Who taught us that family isn't about who you're born to? It's about who shows up and stays. The others clinked their glasses against mine, and I smiled. Not the kind you wear to keep peace, but the kind that rises from somewhere true. Later that night, when everyone had gone home and the last of the dishes were drying on the rack, I stood alone by the window, looking out over Denver. It had taken me years to build this view, years of late nights, self-doubt, invisible battles, and quiet courage. But none of it, none, mattered more than this simple, sacred knowing I was no longer trying to be enough for people who never made room for me. I was no longer shrinking to fit into their idea of love. I was enough. Not because I fought for it, but because I stopped fighting myself. And in that stillness, in that hard-won quiet, I finally understood the greatest thing I'd ever owned wasn't the penthouse. It was me. That night, standing in my kitchen with empty glasses on the counter and quiet music humming through the speakers, I realized something I hadn't been able to say out loud until now. I don't need to earn peace anymore. I don't need to chase their approval to feel whole. I've chosen myself. Not in anger, not in spite, but in truth. And that truth, it's quieter than pain, but it holds more power than I ever thought possible. So tell me, have you ever had to rebuild from the ground up? Not with bricks or plans, but with boundaries and courage. Have you ever chosen yourself over people who only loved you when you were easy to control? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this one resonated with you, even just a little, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your voice, your value, and your life. Because sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is to stop asking for permission to exist.